Hey everybody, welcome. I'm Lauren Costantino, and this is Speaking of Miami. After COVID, here's what women need. Speaking of Miami is the Miami Herald Editorial Board's live stream series that connects viewers with South Florida newsmakers for conversation and insight into some of our most pressing issues. Just to clarify for everybody tuning in, we are responsible for the opinion pages of the Miami Herald, and we operate separately from the newsroom. We hope that this series will help you get to know more about our community and maybe even spark some new ideas. We welcome your feedback about what you hear today and suggestions for future discussions. Today, we're going to talk about an issue that you've probably been hearing about from women have been hit hardest by the pandemic. They've dropped out of the workforce in greater numbers than men. They often handle more of the responsibilities at home, including things like childcare, schooling, elder care, and housework. They were already being paid less than men prior to the pandemic, and returning to the workforce will likely be harder for them, impacting their upward career mobility. Women are also more likely to be frontline workers, especially in healthcare, so they've shouldered that risk and responsibility as well. This is not a fair picture that I'm painting by any means. And if the pandemic taught us anything, it's that things need to change. So today we're going to talk about some of these issues and hear from experts about how we can move forward and propose solutions that will benefit everyone, because these are issues that affect everyone, not just women. Now I'm going to introduce our panel of 3 experts, 2 of whom are women who live and work in Miami. We'll also be hearing from readers who have sent us questions or concerns. And if you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube, welcome. Feel free to leave a kind, supportive, respectful comment or question, and we might have time to read that as well. So here with us today, we have Lauren Bauer. Lauren is a fellow in economic studies at the Brookings Institution and is associated with the Hamilton Project. Her research focuses on social and safety net policies, including federal nutrition assistance programs and education. Welcome, Lauren. And Daniela Pierre is also here with us today. She is the president of the Miami-Dade branch of the NAACP. She's an advocate for affordable housing in Miami, and she works to connect people with the resources that they need to survive. Welcome, Daniela.
Thanks for having me. Good evening, good afternoon.
And we also have Karen Gonzalez here with us today. Karen is a musician, a yoga instructor, a proud mother and wife, and she will weigh in on the pandemic's toll on women's mental health. Welcome, Karen. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So I'm so excited that these women are here with us today to talk about some of the issues that we as an editorial board wrote about in our latest project on women in the pandemic. And I'm hoping that after this panel, you all can go and read our series online. And our Facebook moderator is going to drop a link to all of those stories as well. So I'll just jump right in. As I mentioned in the introduction, women often shoulder more of their responsibilities at home. And Lauren, I'll direct this first question to you, because you've analyzed data on how women spend their time during the pandemic, and you found that caregiving responsibilities often fall disproportionately on women and mothers. And this is something that was true before the pandemic. Can you, just to start us off, talk a little bit about these findings and how this, how the effect that this has on women's participation in the workforce?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. So as you said, the caregiving responsibilities that women have had have always been, a problem or a burden that women are happy to bear. But the context of that changed during the pandemic. And so what my research has found is that women during the pandemic were working 2 full-time jobs. They were working at home as caregivers, they were working at work, and they didn't have much time for anything else. And what I'll say, I don't think would be surprising to any of the women on this panel who are watching either. Women were doing twice as much direct caregiving of their kids as their husbands were, and even more obviously for single moms. They were spending 3 more hours in the company of their children than their partners were. And this affected their work life really quite differently. So, about 1 in 10 women said that they had to leave their job at some point over the course of the past year and a half to care for their kids. They are less likely to be working now than they used to be. There are financial consequences to that and long-term career consequences that matter. And it's been particularly burdensome for families that have elementary school age kids, as well, perhaps surprisingly, as moms who are able to work from home, because they were not able to separate their work life from their home life, and the juggling was just too much.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I want to come back to a few of those points in a bit, but I first want to give another one of our panelists, Daniela Pierre, the platform to speak. Daniela, you're a working mother, single mother. Can you talk just a little bit about your experience balancing work and parenting during the pandemic? And how does that compare to what life was like for you before the pandemic?
Thank you again for having me. An excellent question. And just to piggyback off of what Lauren mentioned, in the workplace, those who were caregivers, that has always been like an unspoken norm, and something has been overlooked for a very long time. And I think through this COVID-19 pandemic, it called upon many employers and even employees to have the courage to demand more as it related to caregiving. In my own personal experience, being a single mother, and at the time raising 2 teenagers that were in their last year of high school, then having to bring all of my work home at the same time I had to help them with virtual learning was very, very difficult and challenging for all of us. There were times that my children were on Zoom and I was on Zoom. So it was a lot of noise going on at the same time. But we persevered. But it was not easy having to be the full-time mom at home and at the same time be that full-time mom to support 2 children in their last year of high school, learning in a whole different way. So that was a lot of uneasiness and a lot of uncertainty, which, impacted sometimes the way that we work and the way that my children were able to perform. So those are some of the things that I experienced, working from home in the time of the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Karen, I want to go to you and give you a chance to speak on this as well. You're also the mother of a teenage girl. Yeah. How has the pandemic affected you as a parent? And I know you're also a really big advocate for prioritizing mental health. So how have you been coping with all of these added stressors?
Yeah, well, I feel lucky because before the pandemic, this is something I'd been doing, like preparing, in other words, having tools and self-care and things like that. But even for myself, and I think a lot of women, I think the first panelist mentioned that we happily do it. And I think that some of it is just, we've done it and not question doing it. And we are strong, we do persevere, but I think it's been like the big reveal to say, okay, well, how much of this do I want to do? And I think it made women really think they really had to start taking care of themselves in other ways that maybe we hadn't before, because it just, for many women, it became too much. They were pushed to their limit. And so having those tools, or finding those tools and revealing those places where there were extra stressors, and women trying to acclimate to this changing environment. So how did I, and even, taking care of a teenager and seeing the amount of pressure that they had of being on Zoom as well, and trying to have her take care of her mental health and prioritize that and teach her that. So, all of these things came up. So for me, it was like digging down deep into my toolbox that I had and really going, well, now's the time to really start using it. And actually, when I say using, it's even now, because the pandemic is not past tense. It's a verb. It's happening, So it's digging into those tools and putting to practice the things that have worked for me, and sharing it with other women.
Yeah, I love that you brought up that point that we're not talking about this as a past tense thing. What are a few of those tools that you were able to, bring back up? I'm sure a lot of women are curious.
Yeah. Well, as someone who's mental health, I approach it more from a very holistic kind of, not to say that other things aren't beneficial, but I try to approach it that way. And I think, it's funny because even with a teenage daughter, I've been talking about mindfulness and things her whole life. And she's like, Mom, I've heard it all already. But to be able, because I think mindfulness has gotten a bad, people think it's just going to be this, like, you're zenned out and you're like, oh, relaxed. And that's not what it is. Mindfulness is just the awareness of what's going on. And so that means anything. You can use anything as a tool. You don't have to sit on the floor to be mindful. For me, it was more just being aware and stopping with whatever was going on. So not being caught up in my head all the time. It's what I still practice, like noticing when I am caught up in thoughts and things, or I'm too worried about what's going to happen later, and I'm not here now, washing the dishes or working with somebody, giving them my attention, working with my child, giving them attention. So this, to me, one of the greatest tools that I practice all the time is just being present. And I think for women, it's so hard because we balance so many things, and we're not trained to do that. We're not trained to just like the be here now, it's cliche as it sounds, but really being present. So, and reaching for tools when you're overwhelmed, like being aware when the cup is getting too full and saying, okay, I need to stop. Maybe I need to delegate. Maybe I need to do this. So it's really just an awareness is, to me, what I'd say one of the greatest personal tools, and that I share with other people.
I love that explanation of mindfulness. I think that's really helpful for a lot of people to hear about. And I actually wanted to go back to something that we've been hearing about from a lot of our readers, which is that, the pandemic brought them sort of much needed flexibility with work, being able to work from home. And Lauren, I'll direct this question to you, and then anybody else can jump in after. One of our readers, Diana, tells us that working from home during the past year and a half has allowed me to be more involved in the care of my elderly parents. How can we sustain this when we return to the workplace? And Lauren, I know your current research kind of touches on this topic a bit of telework. Can you just respond to that question about sustaining work from home post-pandemic?
Sure. So I think we'd want to think of it more broadly than work from home in terms of workplace flexibilities that help families live whole and healthy lives. I think the person in my family who changed their behavior the most over the pandemic was actually my mother, because they pulled my grandmother out of assisted living facility to live with them because they were worried about her. And as soon as they sent her back, she came to live with me to help me with my kids. So, but she was able to maintain her part-time job as an administrator at a small law firm because she had always been able to work it remotely and had the flexibility already built into her job to handle all of these caregiving responsibilities that were on her plate because of that flexibility. And so I think those flexibilities are things that would make our lives easier. In some places, obviously, it made it a little harder over the course of the pandemic because you had flexibility to not go into the office, but you were monitoring your kids' schools for 6 hours a day. That's not flexibility, that's two jobs. And so I think, this was a long-standing problem that women disproportionately have what we call, non-market labor. They have jobs where they aren't paid. And we need to have our paid jobs better accommodate that so that we can take care of our families.
Yeah, definitely. Does anyone else want to speak on that, Daniela?
I would agree. While many had flexibility with their jobs, there were also a set of occupations that did not allow that latitude, such as those who work in hotels and our restaurants and our grocery store clerks. They were unable to work from home. They still had to report to work and report to duty as if we were not in the pandemic. So I salute all of those who had the opportunity to have the flexibility to work at home. And I also salute those who carried us through the pandemic. They got up, they were at the grocery stores, they were at the hotels, they were at our restaurants, they were still there, it didn't close. So those workplaces should have some type of arrangement so they can offer professional development. So in times of a pandemic, those workers who may have small children at home are able to do something. Maybe they're cross-trained so that they can work in a different capacity rather than being on the front lines when they have small children at home. And let's face it, while the pandemic was in its peak, many of the childcare locations were closed. So now you have that parent, that mother or that dad who has always worked, let's say at a Publix or a Winn-Dixie or even a Burger King, and they depended on a child care facility, but that place was now closed. But they still had to pay their rent. They still had to pay the utility bills, and they still had to report to work. So we have to find ways via different employers where you may have employees who have that automatic flexibility considering their role, but you also have those jobs, well, they don't allow that flexibility. And that's where we need employers to consider additional options. So offering development training so those workers can be cross-trained. So in times of crises, they have alternatives so they can be able to still maintain family. I think that's very important.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Well, I was just going to say, I was speaking to Danielle and the other woman, and I think that, the pandemic is in this happening, but things have seemed to ease up a little bit. That, speaking to, you said, how can you continue what we, whether it was being able to have the support of other people, or I think people really noticed during the pandemic this feeling of how much we need each other. And like, especially, with women and kids, that we, this feeling of isolation that I think we're used to before, like do it on your own, everything, and, not reaching out for help and, just kind of killing it all the time, this whole thing. But what happened, I think that people realized, no, we do need each other, especially women, to connect with each other and to form groups. It's one of the things that helped me, like kind of sporadically. There were a few women projects that I did online, and those literally became like just a source of, not just, it was a business project, but it ended up being, one woman was getting divorced, this other one and we ended up helping each other move through everything. And I really hope that if other women did have those things happen, that they continue. And it's not kind of like, we have a hurricane in Miami and everyone helps everyone, and then when it's over, the electricity comes back on, it's like, bye. So I think in continuing, whether it's in workforce, like Daniela was talking about, but also personally, to be aware of, like, I need this connection. How do I continue this? How do I build on this? And also to lighten the load, because just to say really quickly, like she was saying about how women do many jobs were not paid. I remember reading Melinda Gates, Bill Gates's wife, realized that she was, this was before the pandemic, that after dinner she would start cleaning up on her own, and she wouldn't ask anyone to help her. And then she had this moment of like, why am I doing this? And started asking. So I think as women, our responsibility too, to lighten our load and communicate, whether it's at work, and continue, like this be momentum, that will sustain us and continue.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you can't see me when you're speaking, but I'm nodding along with you as you're saying all of this. So we're here with you. And Lauren, you've looked at how childcare impacts mothers and fathers, and you found that working moms spend more time than working dads on childcare. And so these are sort of like gender roles that persist in 2021, right? And it's not surprising, but how do we make progress in that area? Because I think it kind of goes along with what Karen is saying, like we're expected to kill it all the time and to go above and beyond. So, how does that kind of relate to this gender role issue?
So I think what's interesting is we had been making tremendous progress on this issue in terms of, the sea change that we've seen in the past 40 years with women participating in the labor force, prime age women, women with kids. Just before the pandemic, basically every woman of prime age had the same labor force participation rate, except for married women with kids 12 and under, which is kind of shocking that, a mom of a teenager and a single young woman were working at the same rate. And that was supported by childcare. But I don't think it's fair to say that childcare was affordable and accessible and of high quality for everyone. And that was a problem before the pandemic. The pandemic just added on unreliable and unsafe. And so, I think there are long-standing trends that we're going in the right direction, that we're worried about the pandemic disrupting. But some of the disruption has exposed to all of us how big of a problem and burden these gender roles are. And, for women to fully participate in the American economy and American life, they have to have good choices. And the choices start with, how can I organize my work and my home life to the best that it can be? And that starts with, to me, affordable, high quality childcare, whether it's daycare, preschool, or public education in the K-12 system.
Absolutely. And Lauren, there is something I wanted to bring up that you're touching on now. In the U.S., Democrats want to include things like universal pre-K and childcare assistance in the budget resolution that they're currently negotiating. Do you think that's enough? And, what other solutions besides government programs do you propose for this issue of childcare crisis?
Sure. So there's a lot of different ways to get to universal pre-K. I think that the evidence is very clear that not only does high quality pre-K prepare children for kindergarten and a lifetime of success, it changes their developmental trajectories and their chances of being economically sufficient, graduating from high school, going to college, all of that. And so it's a worthy goal to do so. I think a combination of enhanced federal investment in early childhood education, as well as continuing for states to make progress, makes a lot of sense. Because the child care is instrumental in my mind to the investment that we need to be making in kids. And so whether it is child care, whether it is, the child tax credit and making it fully refundable, whether it is, stuff that I've been working a lot on, which is child nutrition programs, all of these are worthwhile investments in children that pay off in the short and long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to go to a question from a reader next. And Daniela, I'll direct this one to you. So Gwen asks us, how can women's issues be transformed into workplace issues? Men still hold a majority of the power at work. So in other words, she's asking, how do we get buy-in on these issues from everyone, not just women? And I know you work with a lot of people in your advocacy work. So what is your response to that?
So I want to definitely go to that question, but I want to piggyback off something that Lauren mentioned. Definitely agree with what she expressed. But it's also important to know that while government can definitely invest in childcare and expand those resources, employers also have that ability to do the same thing. They can offer childcare as a flex plan benefit for those employers who offer health insurance. Consider a flex plan benefit for childcare. And don't just stop at childcare. Aftercare is also so very important, especially to working mothers. So we're going to call on employers to consider expanding their flex plan benefit options for those working moms. Now, how can women, I guess, grow within the workplace, transform or transcend those norms where men tend to lead in the boardroom? I would say, number one, women, we have to support one another in the workplace. And let me give you an example. If I'm the only woman in the room, I need to be able to support or elevate or amplify the work of other women that are a part of my team or a part of my workplace. It's on us to a certain degree to be able to pay it forward and pull other women with us as we move throughout the workplace. While we're in those boardrooms, we need to be thinking about developing teams that encompass diverse women groups. We have the power to do that. We're talented, we're capable, and it's on us to make certain that happens. Also, many jobs and many roles, they give committees. You have committees at many of the workplaces. Sign up and become a part of those committees. And once you get on those committees, don't just sit there. Be an active voice and catalyst for change. And while you're doing so, think about bringing other women along and have those conversations with men. Those men who are in the boardroom, they may not know that women want to be there, right? They see us working. They may think we're comfortable at whatever level or status or classification that we have. But have those conversations with men as well. Allow us to be a part of those projects. Allow us to lead up or launch some new ideas. And when those happen, women, we need to support the women that launch those ideas. So those things can happen. And I also would say there's a great book by Minda Hart called The Memo. I challenge everyone, if you're trying to grow within the workplace, that is an awesome book to read, to find out, especially women of color. That's the roadmap to success in the workplace.
Okay.
I love that, because I just wanted to say, because one of the things I'm passionate about is mentoring and educating young women. And I think to piggyback what she was talking about in like a change in perception, but I think also education for younger women, these women that are coming up, because they say that the reason sometimes women in the workplace, this is like it's data, don't get the same amount of money sometimes as we don't ask, like, being trained to be assertive. For example, I work with young teen girls. I don't know how many times they say to me, I feel like I always have to be nice, and like this likability factor. And so to be educated about being assertive and being able to know their worth, know their value, and be as, as forthright when they're dealing with employers and things like of that nature. I've worked with some of the schools and really trying to educate, getting these girls to educate, and also taking care of themselves, really taking care of themselves, and prioritizing that. So I think education for this next generation coming up, because we're part of this new shift, but we also, as women of our age, have some of this old residue of the gender roles. And now these young girls that are coming up, I mean, it's a whole different story, but there's still a little there too for them. So, educating them, I think, would be really valuable.
I definitely agree with that. Education and mentorship and coaching. A lot of times women get into the workplace and they lack mentorship. They lack coaching. I challenge the women that have been there for years. Sometimes women are on the jobs 15, 20 years. Pay it forward. Reach back and mentor a young woman, a young millennial that is on the new job. Mentor them. Let them shadow you. Expose them to the opportunities. Many times I approach a different workplace. Women they're taking charge, but they're still not in their boardroom. They're the only one in their boardroom. Shouldn't be like that. So I definitely agree with Karen. Education is definitely paramount to us moving forward in the workplace. At the same time, mentorship, coaching, exposure, having those opportunities. You can have those opportunities at the workplace, and you can also have those opportunities by volunteering in your local community. The opportunity is there if you create it and reach back and support other women along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. This is all really great. I sense a book club brewing as Daniela's book recommendation. I'm writing that down. Yeah, I mean, this, I want to go back a little bit to Karen and you talking about mental health. I just want to highlight something that you've done. You're, one of those sort of irritating people who picked up a new hobby during the pandemic. And, you were able to find time to sort of do that for yourself and about like what that hobby was, how you got back into it, and how you made time for yourself to do something that you thought was meaningful.
Yeah, it was interesting because I think probably a lot of people went through a lot of reflection, and it was, I've been singing my whole life, so I have a band, and we kept rehearsing during the pandemic. We couldn't play anywhere, but during a rehearsal, one of my the bass player, he said to me, because we do a lot of, it's like jazz, we do improv, we do a lot of different things, and he said, you really need to like master an instrument. You really need to like focus beside your voice, and so. At first I tried the piano a little bit, didn't connect. And then it was the guitar. For years, I wanted to play the guitar. I tried playing a few times. I couldn't do it. I felt like, I'm too old. It's like that you should do that when you're a kid. And then I was, this idea of you can't, and then I say now, you can teach an old dog new tricks. It just depends on how many hot dogs you have. And so I was just finding that those hot dogs were sitting down and being willing to be a beginner and not be good at something, which was like kind of a relief, and being able to like have patience with myself and just anyone, if you've ever thought about taking up an instrument or something like that, you should do it, because it was so, I fell in love with music all over again, so much more deeply, to play and to like sit with the guitar. Like that was my glass of wine. That was my Xanax, because during the pandemic, there was a time when I used to hardly ever drink, and then I was drinking a glass of wine every night. And I was like, this is not serving me. And so the guitar was just like that path, and it really opened up this idea of there's so many different versions of who we are as people and as women. And to do something that I thought I couldn't do reminded me that I don't have to believe that who I've been up until this point is the total story. And so as we can keep reinventing ourselves and discovering things. And so, yeah, the guitar is just that pathway to do that. And I'm really grateful.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that. Lauren, I want to go to you and get a little personal as well. The work you do, don't be scared. The work you do is so important, and your research, we've been hearing so much great information from you. Can you just talk a little bit about like the reason why you got into this type of economic research and how it relates to your own life?
Sure. So I think, I have a 9-year-old who was 7 when this started. The first week we were home, I said to a colleague, this is not going to be over soon, and it's really going to change women's lives. And so we pulled some money together to put a survey in the field of moms with young kids, because I wanted to make sure that not just women like me, high income women in wealthy areas who are like irritated by the whole situation, that their voices were influencing the policy discussion. And we learned a lot from going beyond. And I think that's one of the values of newspapers and journalism, right? Is you're talking to real people and not just to people just like you. And so that was the motivation for doing this. And then we've kept it up in order to try to influence the policy discussions that are happening in Washington, to use this moment to make some long-term fundamental changes that have been a long time coming, whether it's in paid leave or access to affordable, high-quality childcare, making people aware about the differences between men and women's experiences in work and out of work.
Awesome. Daniela, did you want to speak on that at all? Okay, I have a question for you next, so that's good. So, I wanted to give you the platform to talk about some of the work you've been doing in the affordable housing space. So, can you talk about just some of the sort of difficult financial decisions that many women who are struggling to pay bills have to make, and, some of those situations?
Thank you for the question. I want you to think about it. Every month on the first of the month, a woman has to decide, especially those of single parent households, we have to decide as to how are we going to pay this rent this month. That bothers us for the whole month, figuring out how are we going to pay this rent, how are we going to get the food, how are we going to get to the bus, the car, you name it. That's a very big responsibility, and it takes a toll over women month after month. Let's take some statistics. In Miami-Dade County, there are over 35% of children that live in single parent households. That's a lot. And every month, they have to decide on how they're going to make this rent. So through my own experience, this is one point in my life, and going back to 2016, where my children and I were on the verge of becoming homeless. And through that, after losing our home, the place that we only knew, we lost our home to foreclosure. After losing my home, it was so hard to try to get back to even becoming a renter. Why? Because if you either made too much money or you didn't make enough money. So in essence, I was priced out. But grateful for the place that I'm living in now that allowed me to move in. And I've been there ever since. Now that I'm gainfully employed, haven't been able to move out because everywhere I don't make enough money. And I'm not the only woman that's going through that. So through my own experience with housing, it compelled me to do more than just sit on the sidelines and hear story after story. So I became a housing advocate. It was something that through my experience, it happened that I just started, advocating for fair housing and more affordable housing. Every month, it's a challenge for women to pay the rent, especially how income has been so stagnant over the years, but rent continues to rise. And I also want to say at the same time, I know in the rental market, it's a business. We understand that. So we're not taking any slight against any landlord. At the same time, just like landlords need good renters, renters need good landlords. So what I'm saying is in this whole pandemic, it's just really, really, been a challenge to make the rent, make it on time, to be able to keep a roof over your head. So as many resources that are available from our state level, as well as our county and various municipalities. And we're asking that, those who are in need to reach out to those agencies that have said that they want to help people with making their rent. You can look at the city of Miami, Miami-Dade County, and the other agencies that are helping with rent. And in the same way, those who are homeowners, it's not only renters that have been impacted due to the pandemic, homeowners also who may have fallen on hard times, they're encouraged to reach out to their mortgage provider as well to see if any resources are there to help them. And through other options, through FHA and HUD, they may have additional options for you as well. But affordable housing it's not easy. And it's the cornerstone to making our communities better. But, we're very challenged at making it happen. That was even before the pandemic. So right now we are looking for creative solutions to really help us to get through this time, but to be able to become better at the way we've done housing over the years. And that's going to take everyone across every municipality, every local office, state, federal. That is a comprehensive approach that is needed now more than ever, so we can sustain families and help our women and children grow.
Absolutely. Did anybody want to jump in and speak on anything Daniela just touched on?
Yeah, I think one of the actual policy tragedies of the past year is how much money was allocated for emergency rental assistance that hasn't actually made it into the pockets of American families. But as Danielle said, if you just Google emergency rental assistance or mortgage forbearance, many families are eligible for relief and financial relief to help them pay down if you're behind on rent or behind on your mortgage. There's a lot of money available right now that hasn't been spent yet. And so, it's a shame that it didn't go out fast enough to help many families, but there's still time and still a lot of resources available.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And I just wanted to throw something in there in relationship to, resources that are available, because, they say that this is where there's two pandemics, the corona and the mental health pandemic. And I think, again, for a lot of women, a lot of families, being in just survival mode and not necessarily taking care of their mental health, but there are also resources available. And for there's NAMI of Miami that has resources for people for mental health, and to seek those out. And for the moms, a lot of times people are caught up in survival. But because I deal with teenagers and mentor other young women, one of the things that I think has happened is as moms or parents, creating dialogue in the family and supporting each other, the mental health of your children, your family, where sometimes we're living life like we're up here and life is down here, and we're kind of hovering above, some of the things that are the heavier problems and more difficult things like mental health. So there are available mental health within the schools. There's a lot of also organizations out there now. You can research them that will give counseling, and I think that's really, really important right now for to prioritize that and to take advantage of those resources.
Definitely. I want to go to a question from a reader that's sort of related to assistance. Shalonda asks, do any of the panelists feel that state laws or federal assistance should be put in place for women with children or caregivers for their parents after the pandemic for at least 1 year? So, she's talking about federal assistance here. Does anybody have an answer for Shalonda?
Absolutely. I think.
Go ahead, Daniela.
Absolutely. I think we already see some of those changes reflected in the child tax credit, but that should continue. And it doesn't only have to be at the federal level. States are empowered to help their people. I mean, that's what they're supposed to do. So there are many things that the state can do. We have a list of nonprofits that are, waiting to, answer that call. So I think, through those collective private partnerships that are for the public, that should be activated right now. We should be planning for that right now. As we are working towards a better normal, I think the state level should be actively planning, for future times of crisis where we already have these things in place. So the federal government has done a part of that through the child tax credit, but there's so much more that can happen at the state level. And if we bring it home a little closer, even at our schools can start planning right now, for future times of uncertainty and crisis. And that can look at how we educate our children, even our families, what supportive programs will be there proactively to help those families navigate such times of crisis. At our state level, we have an affordable housing trust fund. We just need the politicians to do right by it. But that's another conversation. But I think, yes, to answer the question, yes, there should be some policies in place set forth by the federal government, and those policies that are already existing at our state level, especially as it relates to housing, speaking about the Sadowski Act and the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, activate that and use it for the purpose that it's for.
Thank you. Lauren?
Certainly, but I think it's also going, piggybacking on this idea that there's more that states can do, not just the federal government. Certainly in Florida, I think it's fair to say that the state has not done everything that it could do to help keep families whole. The state declined to apply to the federal government for free money for kids to eat over the summer. Florida is notorious for having a very difficult to navigate unemployment insurance system. To the extent that we think people are worthy of benefits, certainly workers are. And so there's much to be done at the state level to learn from the past year and a half and avail themselves of all of the resources that are necessary, not only to help households that are struggling, but to bring money in to invest in the local economy, because that's what spurs economic growth. And so I think there's a lot that can be done in the state level, in addition to some of the things, as I said, on the federal level that have been a long time coming and should be permanent changes.
And can I just say one thing, Lauren? I think that there's policy, right? There's the policies that are created, and then there's the institution of those policies. What I heard time and time again from other people and other women is, where is the centralized communication of how to get those benefits sometimes? So many people are just getting it word of mouth, sharing it with one person or another. And maybe Daniela can speak to that, or that's something that can be, even with the Herald, or some place where people get their news or their information to know, because there are people who are displaced but didn't know one thing was available or the other. Even business people, if you didn't know there was as far as centralized communication, Danielle, where are most people getting that information from? Are they getting it word of mouth? Is there a place they can go and find out what are all of the benefits and things that are available? Because sometimes there's earmarked money from the government that just sits somewhere because people don't know how to access that. Daniela?
That's a great point.
If I may, great question, Karen. That exposes something that exists in our community, which are silos. So many people get information by word of mouth. But yes, I would agree. There needs to be maybe not one central place, but at least a place where you can get great information from. And while we're here on the Miami Herald's platform, I'm going to definitely say, read the Miami Herald, check them out in print and online to get all the information that you need as it relates to our local community. But take it a step further. Many of our municipalities within our county, they have their own TV channel. So do you know that Miami-Dade County has their own TV channel? Of course, you have to have either, I believe, direct TV or cable to get it, or you can even check out WLRN channel 17. But we should be advocating for those free channels that are part of the network, that information is available on that on a scrolling basis. So that's one way. Secondly, we need to have an app, some type of app that is available for free for all platforms, whether you're using my favorite, BlackBerry, no judgment, y'all, or a BlackBerry phone, an Apple, or whatever phone you're using, whatever device, it should be an app where you can get the latest information about what's going on in your community. Right now, to answer your question, Karen, word of mouth, and also, they're on different platforms. So if you want to know what's going on in the county, you got to go to Miami-Dade County's website or call 311. If you want to know what's going on in the city, you got to get on miami.gov to find out what's going on in the city. If you're in Aventura, you got to go on City of Aventura's website. but there should be, some local medium that will serve, as a channel and network to get all that information. But right now, that's usually word of mouth. People are in silos. Sometimes you get at your workplace. Sometimes there's some newsletters. We can't forget about the radio. Sometimes it's on the radio. And sometimes, hey, they call the NAACP, right? And if we don't have the information at the NAACP, we're going to call to get it so that we can share it with our membership and share it with the broader community. That's why it's important for us to have these partnerships, these private and public partnerships that are for the people, so that they can have that information and available in multiple languages and available where it's simple and easy to read, so that people can understand, oh, okay, tonight there's a budget hearing. What's the budget hearing about? Who knows about it? So break that information down so, everyone can understand what it is, because it's so very important on how our community and how women are able to function. So I definitely thank you so much for that question, Karen, and hopefully I didn't take too much time, but there are a number of ways we can collectively work to maybe start something where we have like a tech hub of information. So wherever people are, they get the information needed to help them not only survive, but to thrive.
Yeah. Mic drop. I love that answer. I love that question. This is such an important topic. I hope that, there are journalists listening, that there are senators listening, that everybody can hear what you all are saying, because this idea of connecting people to vital information is so important. And Daniela is a housing conduit, so she's able to connect people with resources, and every community needs somebody like that for every issue that we have. So thank you for the work that you do, and all of you for all the work that you do. Okay, I'll stop rambling. I'm going to go to a question from a reader that kind of touches on something we were speaking about before, for mentoring women. So Julia asks, there's a general feeling of instability for many women surrounding work and earnings, childcare, children, and our family's safety that just gets pushed below the surface as we attempt to survive in the present climate. So Karen, I'll throw this back to you first, then anyone else can jump in. She asked, how can we create more women helping women groups to foster growth and support so we don't all feel so isolated?
Yeah. Well, I think, like I said earlier, the first thing is noticing, really being aware that it's happening, right? I mean, I've always been the kind of person that was like these other amazing women here. I always feel like I'm very independent. I can take care of everything. And, the pandemic really ripped the scab off of that. And I think that for women, first noticing that you are overwhelmed and really prioritizing it and reaching out, and finding ways like, talking to other women and asking what they're doing. Like, we talk about a lot of things in our life, like people have conversations that sometimes we're not exchanging valuable information. We might just be distracted, but think of every conversation you have as an opportunity to share information. It could be anybody, and talking to them and getting that information to help you to be able to, improve your situation, I think is highly beneficial. Noticing when it's like you really need to reach out.
Absolutely.
And you're not and the other thing I just want to say too, this is really important, is because like the underbelly, like that you're not alone. We live in a very individualistic society, and like in the Black community, there used to be Black churches, and other communities, the Jewish community, but if you don't have some of those things have changed so much that, this is individualistic, like I'm all alone, I've got to do it all by myself, and there's no one to help, and that isolation. And the truth is, you're not alone. You're not alone. There are resources, and to seek them out. And even for myself, like letting go of that pride, like I can do it on my own, and it's like, it's okay. And whether it's creating a book club with other women, sometimes that sounds frivolous, but it's like, you'd be surprised when you build bonds, real bonds with people. That's the person who's going to show up and, when you're sick and help you. That's the person that you could say, hey, can you watch my kid for a little bit? Like community, like having community has been a resource for women for centuries. And I think living in the big city and feeling again like you're on your own, a village of one, but being able to really create those villages if they don't exist.
But I think that that is one of the things that's been hardest about the past year is, can you have your community and rely on your social networks and resources or build new ones when it may not be safe to be together? And, you know, that is something that I think a lot of people had to work through and cope with and, you know, figure out what kept them safe, what kept their loved ones safe, how to provide that elder care, or, you know, pick up your friend's child from school with your kid if everybody's wearing masks. Like, what are you comfortable with? What does community mean in a world where we're trying to keep everyone safe? And that's been a really, I think, hard thing to figure out how to resolve for many families.
Well, you know, we're fortunate that we live in a time of technology, because if this had happened in 1940, I live in an old home here where they, you know, the women would communicate like, hey, Gladys, screaming out the window. Like that was the extent of communication. I think that we can use the technology, whether it's through Zoom we used during this pandemic. Pick up your phone, call somebody. If they're millennial, they probably won't answer, but if they're a little older, you know, make that we can communicate. And even if we can't do it in person, and we had things during the pandemic where we got together with that distance, and we need that. We need to have like human connection, because that is something that sustains us on a very deep level. So we have the energy and the ability and the fortitude to like face our challenges. So I think to use technology is great that we have it and we can use it.
Thank you for that. Speaking as a millennial, we do pick up the phone sometimes. So
Rarely.
Sometimes.
We'll get back to you in 3 days after we
We'll
process.
never listen to a voicemail.
No.
Never.
Oh man, we just have a few minutes left. Unfortunately, I feel like we're getting to a really good place in the conversation, but we have a few minutes left in the program. So I want to just give everybody a last chance to sort of speak. You know, and the final question is just, do you feel you've changed significantly during the pandemic? How have you changed? Has it been for better or worse? And let's start with Daniela.
The pressure. Wow. Well, let's see. Have I changed during the pandemic? I think the pandemic changed me. I have really become more reliant on technology. To echo what Karen just mentioned, you know, I found myself using technology more, finding new apps and finding new ways to connect and learn more about things using my digital devices. So that's definitely something that has changed me. I've always been a lover of technology, but I'm someone that appreciated the high touch dynamic. So I'm a person that really wanted to, you know, kind of have that one-on-one, up close and personal conversation, but I had to find a way to dial that back and use technology as a way to stay connected. So that's something that has changed me. And also just, you know, being able to continue to do, you know, housing work and continue to show up at work, right? Continue to mask up and show up like everything's all right is a challenge in itself. And I think we do that very well as women, give ourselves a hand. You know, we masking up, making up, and we know we got a lot of stuff going on, but through it all, we're here, and I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I look forward to continue the conversation in future times. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you, Daniela. Karen, I'll go to you next. And I just have to say, I'm getting comments and texts blowing up my phone that people are requesting you to sing a few bars. Not to put you on the spot, but if you wanted to close out your, you know, with a few bars, the floor is yours.
Okay. What I was going to say is that, you know, for me, the transforming part is it was humbling. You know, that it humbled me and broke me down, but then also I got built up again. And these women here and women in general were amazing, right? And so it helped me dig down deep and find parts of myself that were even stronger, and but in a very real way, in a very real way, like real strength. Like I feel like the strength that women have had for centuries, and so I felt like it helped me discover that instead of just kind of skating through life, and not having to be challenged in this way. But it was definitely humbling, and I think that we're all still. I always try to I'm trying to live in this balanced place where it's like in Buddhist philosophy, they say happiness is easy when you have no choice. But what that really means is that being able to, whatever happens in life, whatever comes to you, that you can be okay with it. So that's more. Everything's gonna be all right. I said everything's gonna be all right.
Thank you, Karen. That was lovely. Lauren?
Well, how am I supposed to go after that?
I know, the order. Sorry.
No, I would say certainly I have changed. I think in a way that Karen just said is I learned to ask for help, and that new habit hopefully will serve me and my family well forevermore, because I never did before and I do now.
Awesome. Thank you. I just want to say thank you to all the panelists for joining us here today. I think we've all learned a lot, and we will hopefully continue this discourse in the future and maybe start a book club. If you have feedback for the editorial board on this event or want to tell us suggestions for future Speaking of Miami topics, email us at heralded@miamiherald.com with Speaking of Miami in the subject line. Thank you.